ahead. You want to go ahead and call the roll?
Sure. Dr. Bullock? Dr. Dempsey's here. Dr. Fleming? Dr. Fleming? I'm not hearing him. Dr. Fleming?
Looks like he's trying to talk.
Yeah, it is not working. Everyone hear me? We can't hear you, Dr. Graham. Can you hear me?
Please enter your access pound or hash. To enable audio control, please enter your audio pin.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, we can. Thank you.
You hear me now?
This is David Fleming. I'm ready.
Thank you, Dr. Fleming. Miss Janeski?
For the record, I want to make sure everybody.
Thank you. Miss Janeski? Mr. McKinney? Miss Boris is here. Dr. Graham? Dr. Houston? Mrs. Jones is here. Mr. Lockus? Dr. Locklear? Miss Loftus? Dr. Mars here. Dr. McIntyre?
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Miller is here. Dr. Weddington? Thank you. Dr. Wood? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the September 12th, 2019 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation programs. My name is Patrick Miller, and I'm chairman of the Professional Educator Prep and Standards Commission, and I call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the e-board agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you have had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for the September 12th, 2019 meeting?
So moved.
I have a motion. Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. Thank you. The meetings from our previous commission meetings on August 15th, 2019 and September 3rd, 2019 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve these minutes. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes have been approved. Thank you. I would now ask Drs. Kim Evans and Tom Tomberlin to provide the State Board of Education and NCDPI updates.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to start off the updates this morning with our action item that we had for this past state board, which focused on AAQEP and that agreement between AAQEP and the state of North Carolina. This item was tabled for September, and it will go back in October for action. There was pretty hefty discussion within the state board members, and they want to think things through before they make a decision on that agreement. The next item has to do with what we'll be talking about today, which is House Bill 107, those emergency rules, and then TCED 008 and TCED 013. Dr. Seiberg presented this item. It was action on first reading. And what happened during the state board meeting is that the policy changes were presented, and we let state board, or Dr. Seiberg let state board know that we would work on rules and they would be presented today at Pepsi during the September 12th meeting, and then a call meeting for the state board would happen before the 24th of September, because that's when they are due to the Rules Commission. And our next two items are discussion items during the September state board meeting. And the first one is the Pepsi report, which will be a consent item during the October meeting, and TCED 016, the Beginning Teacher Support Program, will go back for action in October. Any questions about that?
Did they say what they're going to do, the board is going to do, or how they're going to find out more information about AAQP?
I didn't actually hear whether they're going to do more research. They just talked about that they need to find out more information and discuss things more. So that's why they wanted to bring it back.
Hi, this is Tom Tomberlin. So my understanding of the board request, there were two outstanding questions from the State Board of Education. Has AAQEP been CHIA approved, which it has not, and is the nature of that lack of approval concerns about the quality of the program, or is it simply a scheduling issue? So we have committed to investigating that question and providing the state board with a response to that. The second question was, does AAQEP rely on outcome data to perform its assessment or its accreditation process? And that seems to be a question in dispute. So we will investigate that and bring back information from the board. Also, another matter that was raised during that was what does granting approval of AAQEP mean for the State Board of Education in terms of its policy? And I had suggested to the board that by entering the contract that essentially the board would be considering this also a route to approval in the state of North Carolina. So in North Carolina, if an EPP is CAPE certified, then they can practice in North Carolina without board approval. They are initially authorized, and then we'll start measuring their outcomes. I suggested to the board that that's the only reason for the board to enter into such a contract with AAQEP is if they also would recognize that as a path for initial authorization. And so I will clarify my comments related to that to the board at that time. And then my understanding is the board will make some kind of decision about their orientation towards AAQEP.
Thank you.
One last announcement or update. I just wanted to introduce Teach NC, which is the online interactive recruitment platform for the state. And the resources that are online with the agenda that accompany the agenda are the links to the homepage, links to the PSA, and better work stories, as well as a flyer, and will be better oriented to this online tool by Princess Brown, who will present during the next Pepsi meeting on October 10th.
Okay. Dr. Tomlin?
Thank you. So also at this past board meeting was a information session for the board by Kate Walsh from the National Council on Teacher Quality. And I'm not sure if everyone from Pepsi was able to listen into that presentation. We have provided the documents that she provided to the State Board of Education. And there are some interesting things within that presentation that I would call to the attention of Pepsi. If you have, there's a cover page of notes where she makes some key findings to the State Board of Education. And one of those is only 14 of 33 elementary programs teach candidates scientifically based methods for teaching reading. And so, of course, that raised some concerns among the board. And then the other finding was only 1 of 36 elementary programs, and that was specifically Elon University's undergraduate program, elementary program, requires sufficient coursework in mathematics content elementary teachers need to know. 3 other undergraduate programs, Meredith College, UNCG, and North Carolina A&T State University, come close, but the rest fall far short. So,
Whoa, that's an amazing thing because I know about NC State.
So I have a comment. I have a couple of comments about this. For those who are unfamiliar with this particular organization, so my first comment, and my question goes out to the general public here in the room, would you consider NC State an F-rated program?
No, sir.
NC State is an F-rated program by this organization. That's one. Kate Walsh has also been on record talking about the myth of teacher shortage. Every month we talk about the teacher shortage. If you can't get 2 fundamental things correct, how can we trust anything you put into this report?
That was a lot more passionate than I was going to share there, but,
Well,
but I agree with you.
We invited NCTQ, at NC State, we invited NCTQ to our campus 2 years ago, and their reviewer sat in a room with NC State undergraduates and told them they were not being prepared to be teachers, that NC State was doing them a disservice. I take great offense at that. I think we produce pretty good teachers.
I'd say they're also advocating continuing that conversation that we've been fighting so hard against from the field, and I think as a group here, that teacher effectiveness is measured by licensure exams. And so part of that's still faulty logic on the part of this organization outside of everything else that's in there. When I look at that, and I did look at it, I had a copy of it before it was presented to the state board, and it looks like that's exactly what they're doing. They're saying that the universities are not preparing these teachers to actually take the licensure exam, and that's not what their goal is. You know, time and time again, I think DPI has even presented to the state board that there's no correlation between a test and the effectiveness of a teacher. So I concur with what you said, and then I just think we have to be careful when faulty logic is allowed to be, somebody to stand up and share that before the State Board of Education when we have made such inroads into progress against just using one thing as a measure for effectiveness.
EPIC a few years ago put out a report showing that the NCTQ standards had virtually no correlation with program effectiveness in North Carolina.
And to add to Dr. Marr's case, I've dealt with NCTQ in 2 different states now. I agree with everything that has been said, and there needs to be a critical analysis of the process and the documentation by which NCTQ comes to its conclusions. CAPE and NCAPE, our main accrediting body, moved away from this process over a decade ago to get to a more rigorous process. NCTQ is stuck with that process.
So I appreciate this conversation. I do. I think my goal here is to share with you that this event happened, because I know for many of our Pepsi members, you may have not known that it happened, or you didn't get an opportunity to listen to the presentation, and so I'm just letting you know that this occurred. It had a measurable impact on the State Board of Education. People were surprised at some of the things that were being said. And so I would invite you all to listen. My understanding is that I will have an opportunity to present to the State Board of Education to kind of clarify the things that were discussed in that presentation, or I don't want to do that as kind of a defending ourselves, but just simply putting out there, here's the reality of how we conduct accountability for EPPs in the state of North Carolina. And I hope you would all, for that discussion, of course, we will bring anything that we're prepared to say that we weren't going to bring to the State Board of Education, we would present to you first. So I would appreciate it if all Pepsi members, including those LEA folks that are on Pepsi, review that presentation, listen to the audio, because there were many things in the audio that are not in this that I felt were not entirely accurate. And one of the biggest things was that our EPPs report pass rates only for program completers who pass the test. And that was surprising to me, because if that's true, we would all be reporting 100% pass rates. And we know for a fact that we are not reporting 100% pass rates. Also, it was stated that we don't publicly report the pass rates by program, even though that has been reported by our Ed Prep division every year by program with pass rates for at least since the dawn of time, basically. And so we just want to make sure that everybody's, this is an opportunity as for us to advertise the fact that we hold EPPs to a very strict accountability model, even in advance of this most recent legislation, House Bill 107. The other thing that that's critically important here is a statement was made that that goes directly to our ability to measure the accountability of our EPPs under 107. And the assertion was made to the State Board of Education unequivocally that we could not We, as an agency, could not attribute the growth. We had no mechanism to attribute the growth of a program completer back to its EPP. And the statement was that NCTQ has tried to do this and failed, and that the state board should recognize that that is not possible. Therefore, your accountability model would be left with only two items. That is evaluation, which she rightly claimed does not have a lot of differentiation and would not be a great measure to distinguish between EPPs, and the recent graduate survey. So I need to demonstrate to the State Board of Education that we have teacher level data that she would not have access to, and we have administrative data that would connect those teachers back to the EPP, and so we can, in all cases, connect a teacher with growth data back to the preparation program from whence that employee came. And so that's a critical piece. That goes at the heart of our ability to have an accountability model for EPPs in the state of North Carolina. So just wanted to let you all know that I think this presentation is worth a review. It's definitely worth a listen, because there's much that was said in that presentation that does not make it into the presentation. And I would invite you all to kind of be apprised of this before we come back to you in October with our kind of response to that presentation.
So Tom, you actually threw out some...
Andrew and Tom and team over there, I really appreciate this. I appreciate the encouragement to listen and look at the presentation. I think I want to do it this weekend. It's my first chance to do it. And I'd like to give some informed critique after I listen to it that would maybe contribute to what you're going to then share to the board. And so is that the kind of feedback you want? I'd like to be able to give that to you so that to shape what you're going to share back to the board.
I would definitely appreciate that. And Dr. McIntyre, just so you're prepared for what you listen to, you are hailed as the bastion of how it's done right in the state of North Carolina. So be prepared to blush a little when you listen to the presentation.
So apparently, Dr. McIntyre left NC State and then went to UNC Charlotte and learned all this stuff about teacher education that she didn't know when she left state.
Can I just stop and give you a little perspective just for a second? I was also the leader of the program at NC State. So, if one gets an A and one gets an F, it's a little weird there, okay? So there's something there. I just want to also I just have to say this about NC State. They have 27 credit hours in their general education program in the STEM fields. I mean, this is almost unheard of for elementary teachers. They get exactly the mathematics elementary teachers need to know. So, we're striving here at Charlotte to match NC State, or to try to even get close to what they do there in the mathematics. I would say that we're far better in the literacy area. But still, it does call into question, as Michael said, whatever they say. So if they get something so blatantly wrong, we gotta. So that's why I'm gonna listen in really carefully and share everything, and then of course, tell everybody that they're correct about anything positive they say about Charlotte. Anyway, and does that. I hope everybody leans in on this and shares just to get facts correct, because in North Carolina we have a much better model that we're working on right now than she does. I mean, we're looking at much more important data to weigh in than she is. So, okay,
Yeah.
Enough said.
Well, thanks, Al. Oh, go ahead, Hank.
One last thing I think is important is that nobody in the state is required, at least nobody in the privates, are required to report to NCTQ. For those that don't send any additional information to NCTQ, they're only getting what's on website publicly available data to make these judgments. So the chance that that's valid at all is incredibly low. So I hope and thank you, Tom, for taking this up and providing some information back to the state board. But I hope we defend our process in this state vehemently against these kinds of attacks from outside evaluators.
So Tom, you talked about like the accountability model and what are some other things that could be utilized as part of that. But, you know, the principal evaluates the program, right? We get a BT survey after they've been through the program. We have an employer survey. And I understand that some of those things, the response rates might be low, but I do believe that LEAs could help with that in making sure that those response rates are higher. And, you know, so those, along with now the mandate of the EdTPA and the PPAT, right? Because it was a pilot before. So now you have those things. So to me, those are all strong pieces that can make up an accountability model. And then the other part of that, and I'm not sure, I didn't listen in, I read, so I'm going to now go listen because that may fuel a little more that I want to think about. But I think there was some conversation around the testing disproportionality, right, that impacts students of color. Well, that's not news. That's not a, you know, something that's an aha for anybody, because that's everywhere from elementary all the way up through college, right? So when we're looking at that, I think an interesting thing would be, why don't we look at the demographics in other professions and whether or not they're holding those people accountable by test, right? I think some of those are the things that people need to have the other side of before they make decisions.
Yeah, just to let everyone know, there is an interesting exchange between Ms. Walsh and board member James Ford around that particular conversation. So that's definitely worth a listen to.
Can I just jump in for 1 second? And I know I'm kind of the outsider on the commission at times and maybe a little naive here, but I just want to state for the record, you know, we've been working on accountability and digging into this for almost 18 months now. And I think have a lot of rigorous thought. We've raised issues and explored things such as demographic disproportionality of test passage. Why is she presenting to the state board and not to us? I mean, there's just something that doesn't feel right about what we're tasked with doing and then how she gets that platform.
That's a great question, Mr. Lakes, to which I have no answer.
It feels like it kind of undercuts what we're taking on and what we've been
I think Dr. Townsend Smith would like to address that question, Mr. Lakes.
Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Townsend Smith. I am the Director of Board Policy and Operations for the State Board of Ed. So the board does appreciate and the feedback that Pepsi offers as the board that is leading this work and providing recommendations. However, with its constitutional responsibilities, there are often times when the board hears from a variety of people to get a rounded perspective, not to say that they're going to act on anything that's ever presented to them at such level. Just because of their responsibilities, they always hear from a variety of speakers. So for this issue session, it was just an opportunity to engage in an issue session around this issue, given the topic of what will be presented and ultimately recommended. There was nothing that was stated at the table that indicated that the board was going to act one way or the other without explicit input from Pepsi. So I just wanted to make that clear this morning.
So I want to go back to the myth that there's a teacher shortage, and I mean, that's not directed at you, because I want to make sure that the state board and everyone else understands that there's a huge pipeline shortage in the state of North Carolina right now. When Cabarrus County Schools has vacancies that we cannot fill, and we are collapsing classes, and we're buying back planning periods from EC teachers, right, who already have a huge caseload. And somewhere I think that was perpetuated in this, and maybe I'm wrong, I'll go listen, but it's my understanding that somehow we are, I don't know, blowing this up or blowing it out of proportion or whatever, but there are huge shortages in the state of North Carolina for teachers, and I just want to make sure that everybody's clear of that.
I don't recall her
Okay.
addressing a teacher shortage directly in this presentation. I don't think that was the nature, and I think Dr. Mars comments about that were things that he had heard her say.
Oh, no, I have an article right here that
Right,
they wrote.
but in
NCTQ
other-
publishes this regularly.
That's right.
This
In
is
other
a regular
venues,
comment that
but
they
I don't
make.
think that particular message was presented directly to the State Board of Education that there is no teacher shortage. Now, as you know, I never talk about a teacher shortage because I'm an empiricist, and my push is we need better data to understand what's going on. There is some, I think what we need to ascertain in that question is there a leak in the pipeline? Like, in a year, we process 30-some thousand applications for a North Carolina teaching license. And clearly, we don't have 30,000 people lined up for teaching jobs in the state of North Carolina. So to me, that suggests there's a leaky pipe somewhere, and our data systems, and we're working very diligently to kind of create a comprehensive data pipeline, so that we understand what's happening from all these people who are applying for a license to a lack of, and once we better understand that, we'll be able to, that would inform policy decisions on how do you address the problem. Is it because people aren't making it from that application into employment, and how can we work with that? So I think it's a fair and valid question, and I don't think anybody on the State Board of Education is operating under the belief that we don't have at least issues with hiring teachers in the state of North Carolina, especially in our rural and poor districts. That's certainly the case. But I just wanted to make you all aware. My personal preference on this is to take this as an opportunity to showcase all the great work that we're doing in this regard, and not really make this kind of an attack on NCTQ. I just think there's enough positive, rigorous work going on in the state regarding our ed prep programs that we can talk about that, and set the record straight with just highlighting what the great work that we're doing in this regard. So happy to get your feedback and your thoughts on that, and we will come back with you next month to discuss this further.
And this is Kim. I will send out the link to the agenda so that everyone can see what Dr. Tomberlin was talking about, and also link to the recording.
Thank you. And I just, one last thing I want to make sure gets on the record, and I appreciate Dr. Jones, what you brought up, and Dr. Tomberlin, your point there. As a futurist who's focused on equity, I would just also like to name that only 18% of our teacher population identifies as people of color. So whether we have a shortage or not, we have a serious problem on our hands. And with the demographic data and the way young people are entering and changing careers, it is also possible that this pipeline will never lead us where we want to go. So I just would name both of those things and want to make sure that the state board is thinking about that as well.
Good point.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Evans and Dr. Tomberlin, for the updates. Now please welcome Dr. Deanna Townsend-Smith, Director of Board Operations and Policy for the State Board of Education, to discuss and present the State Board's strategic plan.
Good morning again. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present the State Board strategic plan. I think that is important for you guys to have an understanding about the plan that the State Board has put together for the state as you move forward with your work here in Pepsi. So thank you so much for this opportunity this morning.
Yes.
All right, so my main purpose this morning for this overview is to provide a historical context, talk about where we were with our strategic planning work, and talk about our current context, which is where we are now and where we're going, and then outline some next steps, explaining where you fit into this work, and leave some time for questions if you have any of those. So, about a year and a half ago, I started this role with the State Board of Education, and I think sometimes I put myself in these situations because I think sometimes I'm a glutton for punishment. I love to attack large issues, and so
They need to mute. I'm sorry, Kim, can you ask them to mute?
And so one of the main things that I was tasked with during the interview process with accepting this job was to look at the state board strategic plan and begin the work, even though they were going to make revisions and an ultimate approval, which happened in June 2018. I took the position in May 2018. Was to look at the strategic plan and determine what changes did they need to make based on, because during that time they had approved the ESSA plan, and there were new agency leadership, there were new initiatives, and to just determine where we needed to go with this work, look at the performance data across our state, just to determine what were the true priorities of the board. So that other plan was from 2014 to 2020. However, I pushed the board sometime in August of 2018 to really look at its strategic plan. And so in the old plan, they had a belief statement, a mission statement, and a vision statement. And while the vision and mission statements have been revised along the way, the belief statement hadn't been revised. And so there was somewhat of a misalignment between those things. And then from the discussions that I was hearing at the table, et cetera, it didn't seem like everything was aligned as we moved about this work. So I charged the board with thinking about if they should revise their vision and mission statement, and if we should truly maintain the belief statement that we had based on information that we were seeing. The old plan was pretty broad, and it was just really difficult to track and measure over time because there were 6 goals within that plan with a lot of words, and it lacked a lot of clarity of what we were truly trying to measure. For example, if you looked at Goal 1, the objectives that were under Goal 1 didn't necessarily measure what Goal 1 was obtaining to do. And so we started this journey of trying to condense what it was that we said were our priorities. So if you flip to the next slide, these were the remaining goals that were in the prior plan. And what we found is that we were having a lot of conversations, making policy decisions, et cetera, and we weren't doing the real work of measuring and reporting out, because we know that what is measured, we truly can see if we are doing better or worse. And so we had a presentation from the governor at some point, September, October, where he outlined his priorities with education here in our state. We had a lot of various different issue sessions along the way to inform this discussion. We engaged in research with other states, et cetera, to determine what it was that we really needed to do. And so if you look at each of these goals that we had in the prior plan, there was so much to measure ultimately when we got to when we were trying to track what it was that we were trying to do. So we started the task of trimming that down. So currently, this work began with a planning and work session in October of last year, and there were 2 goals. The 2 goals that we were working on was alignment and deciding where we were going to go. So we reviewed, I don't know, like most strategic plans, we create them, they live on the shelf, we never revisit them, etc. And what we were finding was, as the board was preparing their board materials, you could see goals and objectives tied to every item because that's a requirement. However, there was no true way to track how many times we were discussing items. So the first initial step that I took was having a scorecard within the board materials. So now all board items are tied to a specific goal and objective, and we track that using a scorecard electronically. We explore gaps within the strategic plan, and then I think where we got the most bang for our buck was when we had that issue session in October, where we started this conversation on equity and what that truly meant and how we were going to define educational equity in our state. And so we had a facilitated equity conversation on the campus of North Carolina Central University. We engaged a variety of stakeholders to review and revise where we needed to get to, and we developed some pretty salient definitions. And once we did the alignment work, we decided which goals and objectives we were going to use based on feedback and research. We continued to host issue sessions, etc. We formed a strategic planning committee, which is led by our very own Mr. Ford, and we created a timeline to launch our plan. The piece that I can appreciate about this process is that while I do a lot of the work of leading this work for the board, it wasn't a rubber stamp approval. They were truly engaged in the process, and they provided pushback and shifts along the way. So while I had certain points where I was like, I want approval by this date, they will provide appropriate pushback for me to seek additional feedback from the field, et cetera, before deciding on anything that was going to set the direction for the next 5 years. And once they made the approval of this plan, because I think where we often fail with our current, with a prior plan, is that it was just set in stone, right? I truly believe, and I have a philosophy, that strategic plans should be living, breathing documents. You should revisit them often, and if you need to adjust to course correct, that's what you should do. And so this approval was contingent based on that premise. And stop me along the way if you have questions. So our current plan was approved in August of 2019. It is published for you on our website. We're not going to go to that today, but I think it's critical to know that it is out there. It's living, it's breathing. And the balance scorecard still lives within that document. You can click on every meeting to determine how many times we are visiting a goal and objective that's within that strategic plan. And we will have times where we will intentionally revisit each of the goals and objectives to course correct if needed. The vision was revised along with the mission statement. And I'm just going to read it out loud because I just think that the revisions were somewhat powerful. And so the vision for the state of North Carolina for education is that every public school student in North Carolina will be empowered to accept academic challenges, prepared to pursue their chosen path after graduating high school, and encouraged to become lifelong learners with the capacity to engage in a global collaborative society. And the mission of the North Carolina State Board of Education is to use its constitutional authority to guard and maintain the right of a sound basic education for every child in North Carolina. The piece of this work that I'm most pleased with is that this is one of the first times that the board has had guiding principles to guide its work. And these guiding principles are embedded into the goals and objectives that are within this plan. These guiding principles are the plan's foundation. So we now have an educational definition for equity in our state, and that is the belief and practice of ensuring that every student is treated in a fair and just manner, providing the necessary allocation of resources for the success of every student, and eliminating discriminatory barriers to full participation and opportunities for every student. And I think the piece that is most important there is every. Every means every in this case. And then with whole child, this definition has been established for some time. We did tweak it for the purpose of this plan, especially in the last bullet point there. But these pieces have been out there, and they're a part of our whole child model. We have a committee, an interagency council that helps us with this work, and this is the established definition for whole child. And you will see all of that work embedded into the goals and objectives. And so now we have what I believe to be 3 salient goals for this strategic plan, which we will measure along the way. However, the first one is eliminating opportunity gaps by 2025, improving school and district performance by 2025, and increasing educator preparedness to meet the needs of every student by 2025. And I think that as Pepsi, because of your work, I see that you are represented in every single one of these goals because the decisions that you make impacts each of these goals. And I think that what I would do today in front of this group is that as you develop your goals and how you're going to and what is going to guide your work for this year, I think that I encourage you to use this statewide plan to frame your work for true alignment and impact, because what you do matters. And I think that where there is alignment, there is power. And ultimately, with us being aligned, I think everyone succeeds, and that is so important. And so the next steps would be to the next steps that we're taking along in this process is presenting this high-level overview to all the boards, advisory boards, councils, committees, community partners, etc., so everybody knows where we are and the direction that we're taking. Encouraging each of these bodies to develop mission statements and plans that are aligned to the state board's work, because we can't do this work alone. We're all in this together. We're going to continue to solicit feedback and make appropriate adjustments. And then we're going to monitor and report our progress at least quarterly. So that is my general overview of the State Board Strategic Plan. I welcome any questions, any pushback. I love pushback. So any questions, concerns that you have about any of the objectives or goals that are within the State Board Strategic Plan. But I think that because there's a true focus on equity and whole child, we all win here. Questions, concerns?
Mrs. Ellen, I actually think it's really fantastic, and I'm so pleased that the very explicit statement around equity is included. I thought the key words were equitable resources.
It took us a while to get there.
Yeah, that's not gonna be easy, but you know, I'm 100% behind this plan. Really happy with it.
Thank you so much.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith, for your presentation. Now, Dr. Andrew Seiberg will present on the accountability measures and sanctions models for EPPs as referenced in House Bill 107, policies TCED-008 and TCED-013 for discussion and then action.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to go over a couple of changes that we made to TCED 013 based on the conversations that we had at the emergency meeting last week. So if you look at TCED 013, I wanted to, I think it was Dr. Marr, if memory serves, that brought up the question around how we're calculating. Well, Dr. Weddington is part two, so. So Dr. Marr asked about how are we calculating the broader the thresholds, essentially. And so at the top of page 2, we've adjusted that to make sure that there's clarity there, so that the for teacher evaluation and student growth, that's going to be calculated using data of all beginning teachers. The means are going to be calculated using data from all beginning teachers. And then we're going to set the thresholds using standard deviations based on aggregates, the averages of those folks that are affiliated with the EPPs. And the reason for that is because if we use standard deviations across all beginning teachers, the standard deviation ends up being like 41 percentage point difference when you get from a standard to move from one standard deviation to the next. So we're using the aggregate, which makes the sample size much smaller because we're using a sample size of the number of EPPs, which is somewhere around 50. And then the standard deviation becomes a more manageable 10. So just to bring some clarity there. And the second thing was Dr. Weddington brought up the notion of can we actually put in what those thresholds are for the different levels. And so we've added a table in there towards the lower middle portion of page 2. Dr. Weddington, we wanted to make sure that that we provide some real good clarity as to what those thresholds are across each of the accountability measures. So those were, again, suggestions that were brought up by this organization. When I presented this to the Board of Education, I basically said we have a couple adjustments that we want to make based off of the meeting we had the day before, and so we'll be adding those, which is what you just saw. And the second thing is that we need to, once we had this put in place, then we had to work with the board lawyers to come up with the associated rules that are affiliated with the policy. So rules is a new thing that is happening for all of us here at the department. We basically have to take policy and then sort of convert it to much more specific processes associated with rules and decision making. And that's a very tedious and laborious process. So what you also have in your handouts is the various rules that are stemming from 013 and 008. As I mentioned last week, while we didn't have them, what everyone here should be aware of is that it's basically becoming more specified than the original policies, but they're all anchored off of the policies. So when you look at the various rules that are associated with 013 and 008, you should see very clearly how those connections are being made. In other words, there's no well, where did this random rule or random line in this specific rule come from? That they're basically anchored off of the policy that was that this group looked at last week. So without going into the minutia there, that's just a quick update. We didn't make any adjustments to 008 in terms of the policy. So again, what is presented for you all is these two adjustments to 013. As well as the rules associated with these two policies for considering as a recommendation to the board for review and approval.
Any questions?
Thanks for the update. This is Hank. Thanks for the updates to the policy, Andrew. I think that's helpful. I would say one thing, and this doesn't affect the vote today, but I think as we think about this, once this policy becomes public and accepted by the state board and is out there for public consumption, and if the dashboard is ready and this data, faces forward towards the public prior to the time that we're actually going to start sanctioning universities, some smart media people or other people could see that and draw some conclusions that somebody's at a sanctionable state before we're actually at a sanctionable state. I think that's a concern for some, maybe for us, maybe a legal concern on some level. So I just think we ought to maybe think about that, maybe get some direction from the board leadership and the litigation team there as well around that.
Yeah, we can certainly look into that. It's not clear to me how all of this is going to play out. Obviously, what Dr. Weddington is alluding to is that this is something that has to be put in place for right now, with the idea of coming up with a more holistic perspective by February of 2020, which one of the subcommittees of Pepsi is working on and continues to work on. And I think the law, I know the law in 599 is very clear that we are not to levy sanctions on any institution or any EPP until a couple years from now. I think it's 21, 22 if memory serves. But the point is that we essentially what's happening is we're getting data and putting that together in a way that will be ultimately used for sanctions in the following couple years. And to your point, Dr. Weddington, I think you're bringing up a good point, which is, how do we provide data publicly that doesn't tee up sort of a disconnect between, what's going on in an institution as institutions and EPPs steer themselves towards meeting the expectations of the accountability model. As we all know, when we change accountability expectations, it takes a little bit of time to sort of to come up with strategies and underpinnings within the EPPs to meet those expectations. So I'll have to talk with leadership here and stakeholders to think about what we can and should be providing. Obviously, the law is very clear about what we are expected to make public, and that's a series of data points that are in 107. But in terms of its comparison to thresholds, its comparison to in a way that may mislead or use inappropriately ahead of when sanctions are put in place, I think your point is well taken. We should be very carefully thinking about what we're presenting and how we're presenting it in a way that is productive to the institutions and the EPPs, so that they can reflect on their practice and improve their outcomes in preparation for sanctionable activity 2 years from now.
Thank you.
Ms. Morris?
Something that I've been thinking about since I heard about this last month, that I've just kind of been mulling all over. I don't have an answer, but I just want to throw it out there, is how is this going to impact our most vulnerable students in low-performing schools? Because as a teacher, I have taught in extremely low-performing schools and high-performing schools. And it is just easier to shine as a quote-unquote good teacher on your observations in well-functioning schools. Likewise, with our data, when you're in a school that has functioning PLCs, support systems for the whole child, and procedures in place, it's easier to show growth. And that's a reflection of a well-functioning school. Well, when we have large populations of low socioeconomic students in schools, sometimes, unfortunately, the schools don't have those procedures in place, and the school is feeling as well, not just the teachers. And how is that going to steer our graduates? Not necessarily intentionally, but if we know EPPs are being rated on that, it's in their best interest as an institution to steer the graduates into going into situations that they're going to look positively. Mm-hmm. And it concerns me about how that's going to touch our students in areas like Hope County, Robeson County, where they're going to not be looked at as positively.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I just want to, for the folks in the broader commission, the subcommittee that's been working on this is very sensitive to that reality, right? So when we look at the current way accountability is set up within 107, given the measures and the subgroups that are being looked at, it's easy to make the connection. I'm not saying that people would do this, but if you had a very small group, whether it be a particular race, gender, ethnicity, so on and so forth, if a program is being sanctioned because of that subgroup, that very small subgroup, you could easily make the connection to, well, we just won't recruit that subgroup anymore. We just won't have that subgroup, which is the antithesis of what we're trying to do within the broader academic community, which is to increase, diversity of the teacher population. So these are the kind of things that I think what you're seeing is the lawmakers set up a system, an accountability system, and then allow for this group, with the inclusion of stakeholder input, to come up with what I hope to be a more robust and more inclusive and more holistic perspective of the pipeline and how it can be used instead of can we create measures and systems that are carrots as opposed to sticks associated with sanctions and helping programs improve and increase diversity across the various EPPs. So I think what you're getting at is something. Long story short, I think what you're getting at is something that the subcommittee is aware of, that the subcommittee is actively thinking about, and that this broader commission has an opportunity to present alternative thinking to the legislature, with the idea that a better model, or a model that could help embrace some of these challenges that the current model has limitations towards, may be looked at and ultimately approved for future activity.
I think to that point, so is there opportunity for us as a commission to propose that the accountability model not include the value-added piece as a core component, but maybe that's a bonus, some kind of bonus on that, and the true components then be made up of the things that I mentioned when Dr. Tombola went in here, the principal evaluator of evaluating the program, the beginning teacher evaluating the program, the Ed TPA and the PPAT, some of those things being the core components of the accountability model, because it's not an option anymore on the portfolio part of that for the EPP. And then the value added, back to your point, that is not a true measure of a teacher's effectiveness in every situation.
Right. I think, and again, I think what you're
Or the programs, What
you're bringing up, Mrs. Jones, is the very thing that the subgroup is working on. We've been collecting from the field stakeholder input on a variety of models, thinking about what all measures should be included in an accountability model, and to what degree those should be weighted accordingly. And so I think this broader commission will have an opportunity to see a couple of different models in the near future. But that's one of the. This is a big task that this commission has an opportunity to really talk with some clarity back to the lawmakers about what they think is a helpful and holistic take on EPP programs, and what we put in there helps drive core beliefs and core missions, of which equity. Issues of equity and diversity across the population, the teacher population, is certainly an important component that's been raised already. So that is a task that's ongoing. And as we get closer and have more things to share with you all, we'll certainly be bringing that between now and February to get more feedback from this broader group.
And I have a follow-up. Since I'm so new to this commission, was there any baseline done to look at the data, the EVOS data, or the growth of beginning teachers aggregated by EPP before we set the kind of the benchmark and the goals for what we're going to be looking for?
So when we initially looked at I can tell you generically that when you look at EPPs by themselves, just those beginning teachers that are coming out of EPPs, the mean is slightly higher than if we were to look at the mean of all beginning teachers across the state. So remember, the state is taking beginning teachers not just from the EPPs, but they're also taking them from other states, and they're coming in from a variety of different pathways, right? So I can tell you generically that when you look at the broader whole, like the whole population of beginning teachers, the mean is slightly lower, maybe a percentage point or two, than if we look at just beginning teachers coming out of North Carolina EPPs.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, I would like to ask for a motion that Pepsi, that Pepsi approve the proposed EPP accountability rules along with the changes to TCED-013 for presentation to the State Board, subject to the State Board attorneys completing non-substantive revisions to these rules to ensure proper formatting and the inclusion of required history notes for each rule. That was a mouthful. So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Sorry, who was
Second.
that? Who was that? I'm sorry.
Ellen seconded it. I don't know who made the motion.
Van Dempsey made the motion. Ellen McIntyre made the second. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you. So thank you, commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. I remind commission members that our next meeting will be held in this room on Thursday, October 10th from 9 to 12. We have now completed our meeting, and unless there is additional business at this time, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.